Mi bémol. Hello everyone, this is Dennis Chang. Here I am in Taipei, Taiwan. I just finished the Taipei Gypsy Jazz Festival. That was a lot of fun. Played some nice gigs, and I'm wearing this shirt that I was given, not shirt, but a cap that I was given. It says, "Make accordion great again." This is not a political statement. Do not kill me when I go back to Canada or USA, especially Canada. Don't kill me. I know how you guys are. Alright, so today we're going to talk about an aspect of improvisation that isn't talked about a lot. And when you take lessons in improvisation, often you're taught a lot of licks, scales, formulas, arpeggios. All those things are really great. And this is something that always confused me when I was younger. I was always told to play the changes. So it gave me the impression that I had to know the fingerboard really, really well, have all these patterns everywhere across the fretboard. But today's topic is about older styles of jazz, namely early 30s jazz, and how it evolved into what it is today. The vision of improvisation in the early 30s, late 20s was, how do you say, it was new. The way we approach jazz today, you go to a jam session, you play a standard, and you have all these cool tricks available to you. But in those days, they were just starting out, and it was more, how do you say, limited, so to speak. Not necessarily by choice. It's because when something is new, it's new and it starts small, right? And if you listen to a lot of improvisers in the early days, the early area of jazz, they rarely play very long phrases and that cover 2-3 octaves the way. For example, if you play gypsy jazz nowadays, you might hear something like this. Right? That's something that you would almost never hear in the early days of jazz. And even with bebop, you have things like, like really long phrases, intricate like that. Instead, I would say that in those days, improvisation was heavily based on storytelling, so to speak. And what I mean by that is, for example, if you take a list of Louis Armstrong, Sidney Bechet, a lot of the early pioneers of jazz, Django Reinhardt, from the early 30s, you will notice that they rarely play quote-unquote copy and paste licks. For instance, again, I'm using gypsy jazz as an example. Often people will teach, myself included, I will teach phrases like this. Lots of little things like that, where you can take it out of context and kind of apply it anywhere. Those things are really great, and you encounter that also in bebop. Like here's a Red Garland phrase. Here's another Red Garland phrase. Joe Pass. Where you have these standalone phrases that just sound good on their own. They're beautiful, they're great to work on. But in the early days of jazz, things like that were very, very rare. So I want you to take the example of Django Reinhardt. Listen to his first recording of Minor Swing. That's the first phrase. And it's connecting A minor to D minor. By the way, I did make a lesson on that solo, I think last year, around May of last year. Check it out. It's connecting A minor to D minor. And it's hard, therefore, to just extract that as a phrase in itself. And then it continues to the next. It's always like a continuation of the previous phrase. That's why when I started out with music of Django Reinhardt, it was so very difficult for me to learn from him, because I couldn't really take anything concrete. It was very abstract and very storytelling-like. And in order to learn from someone like that, you have to have quite a lot of musical maturity, which I didn't have in those days when I started out. It took a lot of time before I gained the maturity to be able to learn from someone like him. And it's the same for a lot of these early jazz players. if you're a beginner in jazz, this might be a little bit too difficult for you, but I'll keep watching, at least be aware of what I'm gonna say so that eventually you work towards this goal. Um, so this way of improvisation, storytelling, that's highly melodic, um, often very singable too, evolved into what it is today. Um, Later on too, in the bebop era, people still played quote unquote storytelling style solos, but often maybe mixed with some of those longer lines, phrases, licks, whatever, whatnot. So here's something that you can do. You can already go listen to like Sonny Rollins, Red Garland, a lot of bebop players, Charlie Parker. You'll see what I'm talking about. For example, there's this jazz exercise that people teach, that I teach myself, um, where you take an entire chorus and you play non-stop eighth notes, or you just take one chord, for example C, and see how long you can play without stopping. You hear this kind of phrasing a lot in gypsy jazz, in bebop and whatnot. And for comparison, check out Django's first recording of the song After You've Gone, sometime I think 1936, and then his recording in Rome, I think late 40s. It's played in the key of C, starting on the F chord, and you'll see what I mean. Towards the end of his life, Django was exploring this new trend of playing longer phrases, eighth notes, uninterrupted eighth notes, or very little interruption. Whereas if you listen to the first recording, it's so much harder to learn because it's a story. It's melodies, riffs, motivic, a lot of kind of sophisticated concepts that maybe too hard for a beginner to grasp. So that's very, very interesting. So that's the early style of improvisation. And keep in mind, in those days, in the early days of jazz, they didn't have the resources that we have today. All those chord scales, like names like Dorian, Phrygian, altered scale, bebop scale, those terms were not used by jazz musicians in those days. Some of them didn't even exist. They just had the major scale and they have tunes. And this is what we're going to talk about. I think one of the most important things in order to learn this style is to have a community of players to play with, to learn a whole bunch of songs, the chords, and then the melodies. And if you listen to a lot of early improvisation, a lot of it is, not always, but highly influenced by the melody. If you check out one of Louis Armstrong's original recordings of All of Me, he starts out, he sings it, but in the first chorus he plays the melody, but it's not really the melody. It's kind of an improvisation based on the melody. And I think this is something that's very, very important to do if you want to acquire this skill to play melodically, to play a story like solo. It makes sense, right? The melody. You mix that with your knowledge of the harmony, of the tendency notes, and you can get something like this, Guitar's attitude. By the way, this is a $100 guitar that I picked up here because I don't have a guitar. I didn't bring a guitar with me. $100, amazing. By the way, I also want to mention that I don't consider myself an expert in early jazz soloing. It's something that I listen to, And when I play that music, the early style, I play it in the capacity as a rhythm player, rhythm guitarist, and also bass player. That's what I specialize in when it comes to that style of music. When it comes to solo, I know the essence of it, but to be honest, it's hard for me because I think you are what you listen to. A person like Duvet lives in that world, strictly in that world. Well, not strictly, but maybe 90%. He says it himself. Whereas me, I listen to so many different things, and therefore my playing, it's hard for me to escape certain things. When I try to play in this kind of early style, it's more, how do you say, the general idea rather than being 100% authentic. For me to do that 100% authentically, I have to like explore the vocabulary in greater detail, and I kind of have to find a way to remove some of my external influences. So you just saw a solo of me playing on that song Gershwin, The Man I Love, and I try to play a solo in that style that I'm telling you, this kind of storytelling, highly influenced by the melody. But there's some moments where I can't kind of escape the things that I do. You know, I did this thing. This is actually from Django, but that's the late period of Django. So I did something illegal. Oh, sue me. So this lesson is not about early jazz, but about understanding this kind of storytelling improvisation, where I think learning the melody helps a lot. But not just learning the melody, but trying to understand how the melody interacts with the chord progression. And what's good about early styles of jazz is often the harmonies are not as complex. So that's another thing. If you're a beginner and you're learning some of the early standards, beware of the of using like things like the real book or whatever, because a lot of the chords that you find in the real book are a little bit more embellished for modern styles. Often in the earlier styles, the chords are a lot simpler. So if you're new to this, you find a teacher that has good ears who can tell you which chords they're using. And in those days, chord progressions were not standardized the way they are today with fake books. Each musician would harmonize a song according to however they saw fit. Sometimes for improvisation purposes, they think, this chord progression, as long as it fits the melody, will sound good when I improvise. I feel comfortable improvising over these changes. I think Django made decisions like that when he recorded tunes. So learning improvisation this way has so many benefits because it trains your ears, your melodic and harmonic ears, to combine the two. Often as jazz learners, when we're learning, practicing these exercises, target the chord tones and whatnot, all that is great, but often certain melodies don't always, emphasize the obvious chord tone. Take a song like Out of Nowhere, for instance. The first chord is G, but it starts with a D triad, kind of. This looks like a D, but it's not. It's over a G. So beautiful melodies are not following a strict rule of, on beat one I need to target the third or the fifth. Here you have the fifth, the sixth, the seventh, and the ninth. And hits the ninth of the E flat. So learning melodies in that way makes you very sensitive to all these different tones that are not always obvious. So that's the case with The Man I Love. The melody goes like this. It's on an E flat chord, but it's starting with the dominant seventh. It makes it very bluesy. It's an E flat major. Many early versions has just E flat major, not E flat dominant, just major, but you imply the dominant. If you just take these notes without the chords, you would think we're in the key of B flat minor, but we're not. We're in the key of E flat. And then goes E flat minor. Same thing. So I constructed my entire solo based on that motif, and every phrase that I played after was built on what was played before. So that's a very interesting way to approach improvisation. So that's my recommendation. A lot of these songs from the Great American Songbook, Tin Pan Alley, all that stuff, 20s, 30s, standards. It's worth learning the melodies in a deep way like that. You have to put a lot of thought into it. It's not just committing the melody to memory. Just put your fingers here, but really think about, okay, that's the fifth. So you have it here. You have it here. Same thing with All of Me. Now, All of Me is a melody that does deliberately target the obvious notes, But you should not just memorize this. You need to memorize the fact that it's eventually be able to play it anywhere without putting much thought into it, just because you know exactly how each note of the melody relates to the harmony in question. Like I said, that's actually very, very advanced. So if you're a beginner, don't worry too much about it. In the beginning, okay, yeah, commit it to memory. Just learn one fingering. That's already a start. Play the melody a lot and put some thought into it. Try to understand how the melody is relating to the harmony, so that maybe one day you play like this, you can do that. So you can do stuff like that. Connect the melody to your knowledge of harmony, so that you can embellish the melody in that way. So definitely check out that version of All of Me that I talked to you about. I think it was recorded in the 30s. All of Me by Louis Armstrong. It starts with Louis playing the melody on his instrument, then he sings, and it's very revealing. I've talked about this in previous videos, like for example this chord progression that's very typical in the old style of jazz: 4 minor, or 4 sharp 4 diminished, 1 6 dominant. A lot of players nowadays, especially in gypsy jazz, we have these phrases like that's cool, that's great, I like that stuff, but listen to the melody. As simple as that. Or you take the melody to My Melancholy Baby. It has nothing to do with this kind of like, right? It's just beautiful melodies. Amazing melodic playing. It's very, very difficult, I gotta admit. So I hope this gives you something to think about and to work towards. Especially, I think this is something that intermediate or advanced musicians can start to think about in greater detail to be a more, how to say, complete musician. I think nowadays a lot of people start the other way around. They start with the cerebral stuff, the scales and arpeggios, and even the licks. Sometimes they neglect kind of the storytelling aspect or the melodic aspect. That's actually, in terms of melodic and harmonic content, is very, very simple, but to be able to execute it is super difficult. Whereas a lot of the musicians in the past, because improvisation started with this thing, the simple stuff, they had that as a foundation, like people like John Coltrane, Bill Evans, etc. And then afterwards they worked towards the cerebral stuff. So it's kind of like 180. And I kind of want to revive this old style, this old approach, because it's very logical. It's very progressive in that way. So progressive that I have to get this hat. Make accordion great again. Alright, thanks guys.